If you find yourself missing the Destruction of Bad Company 2 but are willing to have it packaged in a free-to-play infantry-only class-based game, then the finals might be your jam. It's not as straightforward as you might think, and there's a lot to know about how to play well, so let's get into it. Here's what we wish we knew before diving into the finals. Number 1. Move and shake. In the closed beta, before you even think about mastering weapons, just learn how to move. You probably learned that the hard way from playing games like Apex Legends and Call of Duty. There's a pretty long time to kill, which could mean dumping multiple mags into enemy players, all while having to evade during reloads. Start by getting good at a combination of running, sliding, and jumping. Also practice getting in and out of buildings quickly, which, depending on class, might mean leaping through windows, or just going straight through walls. If you're good with a gamepad, as of right now there isn't much support, so dust off those mouse and key skills. I started using mostly gamepad years ago, so apologies, you're going to see me struggle with the controls a little bit here. Number 2, turn down for what? When buildings start dropping, with explosions going off and players flying around on zip lines, it's hard enough to see what's going on. So don't be afraid to turn down your graphics settings. We were just using a GeForce RTX 2080 Super and turned down everything to medium and then turned off motion blur. That seemed to help the most. With great destruction comes great responsibility to keep a decent frame rate. Number 3, pick it up or toss it. With all that chaos, you might miss that you can pick up a lot of things in the environment, even things you might not expect. You'll notice the goo canisters and explosive cylinders that are scattered around the ground and also hanging overhead in crates. But you can also pick up things like planters and use them as cover. More importantly, you can pick up your team's death statues and then move them inside or somewhere safer to revive them. Or if they're in the floor above you, just take out the floor and revive them where you're at. Number 4, the best defense. Defense is a winning, if not quite as fun strategy in the game's current and only mode cash out. A lot of the gear in the game, like barricades and goo, don't really make much sense until you realize that matches have a flow between attacking and defending objectives depending on what's happening in and around. At the most basic level, your team gathers cash from vaults and deposits cash at the cash out points. That's the attack part. If your team makes a deposit at the cash out point and you find yourself ahead of other teams on the scoreboard, it makes the most sense to then set up defenses at that location and just let the other teams fight it out amongst themselves. You can win a lot more often than you think by doing that. We've seen some pretty creative strategies from teams, including a Rainbow Six Siege style outside-in defense, where instead of defending from inside the room, you just stand outside of the room and blow the walls out and drop anybody who comes in. As well as teams hitting up their own zip lines with goo bombs to trap chasing enemy players. If you're ahead, as much as you want to go out and attack more by picking fights and stealing more cash from other teams, there's some pretty stiff penalties like a long respawn timer for getting your team wiped. So on that note, if you're the last person alive in your squad, run away rather than stick around. Number 5, get creative. When it comes to attacking or defending the cash out points, there's a lot you can do. When it comes to attacking, many classes carry explosives that wreck floors and ceilings, which means either dropping the cash out point through a floor down to your level, or opening up a ceiling and raining down grenades. If you're attacking and notice a box of explosive cylinders hanging over the enemy team, go ahead and drop it on their head, or add a lot of goo to the cash station to make it harder for enemy teams to even get to it to steal the cash. We tried a few types of traps involving bounce pads and mines with limited success, but what we learned is that you can stick mines and bounce pads to walls and ceilings. The most effective trap seemed to be a bounce pad on the floor and a mine on the roof. There's also some classic Battlefield tricks you can use here, like leaving C4 behind in the box and then clacking it off when you see the enemy stealing. Number 6, goo. It has more properties than you might think. You can use it to scale the outside of buildings and hit objectives from unexpected angles. You can set it as a trap because it burns. You can use it as instant cover to revive a teammate, or goo up an enemy death statue to make it harder for them to revive their team. The more I play, the more I see people do things that slow down or impede the opposing team using goo. So pay attention, class. Number 7, money football. Like in Halo, if you're running with an objective, in this case a cash cube, it's better to throw it ahead of you continuously than carry it. That lets you use your weapons while you go. You can also save time by throwing it to your teammates ahead of you, especially if they're on rooftops, or you can chuck it through windows right to them at the cash out station. Number 8, modifiers. If you're running along in a match and suddenly start jumping higher, that's because the game has random modifiers. This can be at the start of the game, like variations in time of day or weather, or random events in the middle of the game, like meteor storms, damage boosts, or low gravity. These can play to your advantage or disadvantage. It's kind of fun how random it is.
Lots of rain in the arena, and with that comes plenty of noise and distraction.
Number 9. Know how classes work together. The heavy class creates routes through floors, walls, and ceilings, while the medium class focuses on team mobility with zip lines and jump pads, and the light class uses speed and stealth to maneuver around the other team. Overall, you do need a mix of class types to have the best chance to win, so do not hesitate to swap to the one that's missing in the pre-round. Let's get into some more details, starting with the Heavy. The Heavy isn't really that tanky, and it's honestly best just behind the team. They primarily focus on floor-ceiling game and create routes through buildings in either offensive or defensive ways. They carry enough explosives to level entire buildings from the ground floor given some time, and that's a totally viable strategy. In closer fights, they tend to get outmaneuvered, which is what really negates their tankiness. They can lay down a lot of fire with their LMG, although the damage output isn't that impressive, and when it runs out, they have a long reload period that makes them pretty vulnerable. Alternatively, they can specialize in close-quarter builds with sledgehammers and flamethrowers, and that works really well inside of buildings. One very powerful combo is using a shield to close distance and then go into town with a flamethrower. Their shoulder charge has more than one use. It can create routes for attackers, it's great for intercepting opponents trying to run away, and it has an extra ground pound effect if you do it out of a window and land on the ground. It can also directly kill a weakened player. The medium there's actually not a lot to talk about here. They specialize in team mobility with zip lines and bounce pads, and their shock paddles have the quickest to revive in the game. A good medium player creates the fastest routes between cache and the deposit boxes. You can get creative by comboing a zipline and a bounce pad for very rapid movement. That or just put bounce pads in unexpected places to throw off enemy teams. It's kind of funny to watch. They can also drop turrets to shore up defending a cache box if that makes the most sense. The light players focus on mobility and can do things like cloak to get around behind enemy teams and cause a lot of chaos. Don't be surprised if one comes up and shanks you in the middle of a fight. Their cloak makes them totally invisible if they're standing still, and one tactic is to run around a hallway or door and then just stop and cloak so an enemy runs right by you. This also makes them great at defending your team's cash out points, where they can just stand in a room being unnoticed and then land a few grenades in the lap of anyone stealing from you. They can trade that cloaking ability for a grappling hook to quickly go vertical and reposition. But it all comes at the cost of being weaker in head-on fights. Light players have more specialized weapons like SMGs, best fired from the hip, and DMRs, best at long range. That being said, if you see too many light players on your team, you'll probably lose because they aren't that great on their own. They don't have abilities to help the team, and when attacking, they're so fast they get too far ahead and quickly become outnumbered. That's what we've seen so far from the closed beta, and I'm sure you've spotted more creative tactics in plays, so let us know what you experienced in the comments below. For everyone else, fingers crossed you get into the next playtest soon. Thanks for watching.